are not the hero. Even if we have a customer story, the tendency is then to make it all about ourselves. Don't do that. When you share a customer story, you go deep into the pain point that customer had. And then what did they do? Sure, you helped, but you're just there, the helper. You're Yoda and the customer is Luke Skywalker, right? You're just the
Yeah.
guide that is helping out. Don't make yourself the hero.
People won't remember what you said, but they'll remember the way you made them feel. If you're able to help them to transport themselves into that buyer and that story, I think that's really powerful. Welcome to the Deep Specialization Podcast, the show where we blend focus, strategy, and client intimacy in order to scale and simplify our businesses and our lives. I'm your host, Corey Quinn. Let's jump into the show. Welcome back to the show. Today, we have a special guest who's going to help us unlock the power of storytelling in sales. I'm excited to introduce Philipp Humm. He is the founder of Power of Storytelling and the author of the best-selling book, The Story Selling Method. Philipp's expertise comes from a unique blend of experiences. He's a former consultant at Bain & Company. He worked as a product manager at Uber, and he's even taken tons of acting and improv and stand-up comedy classes. But what really sets Philipp apart is his passion for helping salespeople connect with their customers on a deep level through authentic and engaging stories. And I know that our audience today is full of digital marketing agency owners who are looking for ways to improve their sales game. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Welcome, Philipp.
Thanks, Corey.
Awesome. So in the world of sales and storytelling, it's no surprise this concept of storytelling is a powerful tool in a sales context. But how would you recommend, let's say, an agency owner who doesn't have maybe a strong background in sales or even storytelling? How do you approach storytelling within a sales context? Like, where do they begin?
So the thing that probably blocks people the most when it comes to storytelling is that they often think that they have to tell these gigantic stories, right? They're like, oh, okay, I have to know, have this perfectly crafted 3-minute story that will go through the entire arc. But even if you can just share snippets of stories, you can, like this, start to inspire your customers on a much more subtle level. So what I would encourage a lot of people, instead of thinking of storytelling as this 2-3 minute stories, think of telling micro stories. And so a micro story, for example, for an agency owner, let's say you're talking to a customer. Instead of just saying, the customer was very happy, you then say, well, in that moment, the customer called me and said, wow, thank you so much. With your help, we doubled our revenue in just 2 weeks. It's crazy, right? Just a snippet there can already make it much more interesting.
That's awesome. And so where in a sales process does storytelling really live? Like, where should an agency owner or a sales manager be thinking about, how do I leverage stories to have the best impact on a sales process? Where does that live?
Yeah. There are 3 areas that are probably the most impactful in terms of story usage. One is right at the start to build rapport. So, right in those first few minutes of small talk. The second one is once you have a good understanding of the problem. So, let's say you've done the discovery and then you want to share actually how you can help them. They share a success story. And the third one is to show a little bit how you're different. So, at one point in the sales conversation, it might come up that, okay, hey, we like you guys, but actually, how are you different from all the others? And so that's where the third story type would come in.
What would be some examples, or how do you approach that first, that starting out story? I think you call it a connection story. Like, what is a connection story and how does that really work?
Yeah. On connection stories, it's often funny because if we think to the small talk, right? If we think back to the last meeting that we had, then we ask ourselves, what did I talk about? And then it's usually like, oh yeah, how are you? Good. It's raining here. Oh, the sun is out. How was your weekend? And it just is so freaking boring. And I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. Hey, we've had thousands and thousands of those encounters, and they've just been so unmemorable. And again, hey, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a missed opportunity. And so, in those moments, let's say someone asks you, how are you? In those moments, that's your opportunity to share a quick story about yourself, a story that shows a little bit more about you as a human. Let me give you an example, okay? Do you want to ask me, how
Yeah.
are you?
Hey, Philipp, how you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, yesterday I actually had a very interesting experience. Yesterday I was a little
Mm.
bit stressed at home, worked too hard, and then usually I just go out, see friends. But this time I thought, let me let me dance, and so I turned on the music and I just danced by myself for like half an hour, and it felt a little bit weird at the beginning, but then it felt just like so liberating. Anyway, what about you, Corey? What has helped you the last time to let go a little bit more of, let's say, stress or so?
That's a great question. I probably should dance more because I feels like just even hearing you say that, that makes me think about how nice and useful that is to release stress.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Now,
Right.
perfect. Thank you for responding there. And so, what you saw there, when someone asks you or me, "How are you?" you can always choose to respond with something more interesting about yourself. And so,
Yeah.
don't think that you have to have the perfect, super well crafted story for those. Like, obviously,
Mm.
I could tell better stories, but this one is just an initial attempt to build a connection. And it's actually
Yeah.
much more about making the other person feel comfortable, making the
Yeah.
other person feel comfortable to share a story in return.
What has to be true for the other person to have the opportunity to feel comfortable? Like you shared something about, something you did, like dancing. It's like, what has to be true about a connection story to kind of open that door for them to be maybe more vulnerable?
Yeah. So for that, for the other person to be more vulnerable, it has to be
Mm.
something that they can relate to. And for example, when I
Yeah.
said right now, hey, yesterday I was working a little bit too hard, I'm a little bit stressed. I think that's
Yep.
probably relatable for 99% of us. But the secret really lies in asking the question at the end. And that's the
Mm.
toughest part. And maybe, I don't know whether I actually did it right now with you well, but that's
Mm.
the question where you want to ask the other person that gets a story in return. So, for
Yes.
example, if I shared something, hey, I just started this new hobby, I could ask you, hey, what about you? When was the last time you started a new hobby?
Wow.
Or if I tell a story about me getting upset about some small thing, then I could ask after, hey, what about you? When was the last time you got upset about some very small, insignificant thing? So, you want
Yeah.
to ask for a specific moment in time, like the when and the where.
Mm. And I love that it's so it's a when and where. It's not a yes. It's not a question that can be answered with yes or no. It's not have you been stressed lately. It's more about like when was the last time you.
Mhm.
And the other piece of it, as I'm gathering, as I'm hearing this, is it needs to be, as you said, relatable. Something that I could easily go into my experience and be able to say, yes, I have had a habit before, or yes, I've felt stressed about it. So
Mhm.
you're not introducing a topic that there's a risk, let's say, of asking them something that they just have no context for.
That's it. For example, today on my mind is writing my third
Okay.
book, right? If I had now told, yes, I'm so happy that I'm almost finished my third book. What about you? Have you written a third book? Obviously, that would be zero relatable, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
I love that. So the connection stories, it sounds like what I'm gathering is that the power in this is really creating an opportunity to move from a sort of more of a transactional arm's length conversation to a human to human type of conversation where, hey, we're just getting to know each other, but hey, we've just covered some common ground
mhm,
to make this conversation more friendly and more approachable. I love
mhm,
that.
mhm.
Anything else about the connection stories that are worth diving into?
I would say just give it a try. I know
Mm.
some people are like, this sounds awful. Like to tell my story unsolicited, never going to do this. I can relate to that. I'm actually introverted. I know it may not seem right now, but
Me
usually
too.
it's pretty awkward at first. What I would
Yeah.
suggest, just gather your own data points. There's
Mm.
no easier way to find out whether it works than for those connection stories. Every
Mm.
single day, you're being asked, how are you? Like dozens and dozens of times. So just
Yeah.
pick one or two of those moments, respond with a connection story, and see yourself where the conversation's going.
So as an introvert, fellow introvert, I would probably approach this just speaking personally that I would probably write out a couple of questions I would ask in that situation. Be prepared,
Mhm,
right? And then be able to ask that and to see what happens.
mhm.
That's how I think I would approach it.
You want to plan it in advance at the beginning, where you're saying like,
Yeah.
I have a bunch of meetings today. Is there anything interesting that has happened lately?
I love that. Now you mentioned the second type of story or third, the second area where a story can come in is really around, once they've identified the problem, how
Mhm.
would you approach that part of the sales conversation from a story perspective?
Yeah. Once you understand the problem, you can then ask them, "Hey, customer X, right? Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
that's a tough problem. It reminds me a little bit of a situation another customer was in like a year back. Would it be helpful if I shared what that customer was going through? And then actually pause, right? Ask the other person, do they actually want to hear a story? And if they say, yeah, sure, cool, bring it on, then you go into your story. So
Mm,
it's almost like you want to transition a little bit into it smoothly. You want to weave it into your
okay.
conversation.
Mm. So you want to get permission.
You want to get permission. And
Yeah.
then once they
Then what
say,
happens?
cool,
Yeah.
we're good to go, then you can launch into the story. And that story is then ideally about a customer, a similar customer to the one that you're talking about that had a similar problem that that customer has. And then you talk a little bit about what that problem was, how you helped overcome that problem, and what the result was at the end.
I often hear like a good story in this context of a success story,
Mhm,
or let's call it, a customer story, that you have to include some data as well as sort of the emotional transformation.
mhm,
And I don't know if that resonates with you, but the idea is that you had this customer come in. This is in a context of a success story. They were struggling with this data point and this emotional sort of
mhm,
struggle. Let's say they didn't have confidence or they were concerned about the future of their business and they were not getting enough leads. As a result of my system, they were able to double the number of leads as well as go from being concerned to confident. Does
mhm,
that
mhm.
does that typically would you recommend that type of approach? Do you find that working?
Yeah, that approach works really well. The only modification I would do is
Yeah.
the moment that you talk about a customer story, bring in the dialogue of that moment.
Mm.
Because imagine if I told you a story and I'd be like, okay, then the client was unhappy, the revenue dropped, and then the client was super happy afterwards, and
Yes.
we were the
Yeah.
best.
Very predictable.
It,
Yeah.
it it can, if you go all the way, it can sound that you're bragging, right? You're like, we're the best on
Mm,
this planet. So what I would
mm,
suggest is use dialogue of that key moment of the story. Every
okay.
single time your story has more than one person, you can share the exact words that were said in that crucial moment of the story. So, for
Mm,
example, with the customer, let's say the first meeting you have. Hey, 2 weeks ago, I'm meeting my customer, and right within 2 minutes, he said, Corey, like, I don't know what's going on, but in the last 2 weeks, we lost 30% of our existing
mm,
customers. Like, if that goes on like that, we're fucked, right?
mm.
And so, what are the exact words that were used in that specific moment? That could be during the challenge, but it can also
Uh,
be at the end. So, for example,
yes.
if you say, "Oh yes, the customer was very happy," it's not very emotional, it's not very visual. But if you say, "3 weeks later, my customer called me and said, 'Wow, Philip, I was on stage yesterday, and
Mm.
guess what? Actually, I love being on stage. I just wanted to thank you.'" This is much more powerful than just saying, "Oh, he was very happy." And so
Yeah.
use the
And
exact words that were used in that crucial moment of the story.
so I love that. I think it's a nuanced point, but it is very powerful. I think about a resume, right? When you're looking for a job and you build up a resume and you send it into a hiring manager, well, that resume is only going to have the good stuff, right? It's
Mhm,
it's not going to talk about that time that you got fired or that you had a disagreement with your boss.
mhm,
And it's almost like these client success stories are something pretty similar where it's like, okay, as a buyer or as a prospective customer, I'm going to be told this story. And of course, it's going to have a good ending. So it's almost like I can mentally check out a little bit because I already know how the story's going to end.
mhm,
But it's when you bring in the dialogue, you said the dialogue of the moment.
mhm,
I think those are the words you used, and using the exact words. I think that brings it to much, makes it much more relatable.
mhm,
And what you said around using their words and repeating their words as if you were them, that's gold. I love that.
mhm, yeah. And for that to work, you wanna also pick some more concise, some more raw, some more juicy dialogue. Because if I
Mm,
said then, "Well, in that moment, my customer called me and said, 'Well, we are, slightly disappointed with the optimization of the supply chain.'" Well, that's still
yeah,
0 memorable, right? And so,
yeah,
I know oftentimes we don't remember exactly what someone said, let's say 1 or 2 years back or a couple of years back.
mm,
There, you have some sort of creative freedom.
mm,
Sure, your story should be as truthful as possible. But hey, if you don't remember what someone said 2 years back, you can pick the words and make it slightly more concise as you
mm.
feel it helps the story.
Yeah, it brings the feeling tone into the story, and I think that there's the old saying that People won't remember what you said, but they'll remember the way you made them feel, right?
Mhm.
And if you're able to help them to transport themselves into that buyer and that story, I think that's really powerful from a
Mhm.
sales context
That's it.
perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah. What other aspects of a customer story you want to ask for permission? You want to find a similar customer who had a similar pain point. You want to use the dialogue of the moment. Are there any other aspects that should be brought into this type of story?
I guess one thing is you are not the hero. I know even if we have a customer story, the tendency is then to make it all about ourselves. So we're like, hey, we had this
Yeah.
customer that had a problem, and now it's me 5 minutes talking about how awesome I am. Don't do that. At the end, when you share a customer story, you go deep into the pain point that that customer had. And then what
Mm.
did they do? Sure, you helped, but you're just there, the helper, right? I think in Nancy Duarte's book, she called it "You're Yoda and the customer is Luke Skywalker," right? You're just the
Yeah.
guide that is helping out. Don't make yourself the hero.
This brings me back to when I was chief marketing officer at a, a large company, and we had a 100-person sales organization, and we were learning about this idea of not being the hero.
Mhm,
That we are not the hero, that the prospect or the customer is the hero, and you can't have 2 heroes in the same story, right? One hero, Luke
mhm,
Skywalker, and so
mhm,
we were realizing that, hey,
mhm,
we need to rethink about ourselves as the guide, and I went straight to our sales presentation, and in our sales presentation, it had photos of our building, about our team, about all of our accolades, and there's a time and place for a little bit of that, but it was really kind of clear that we were trying to say, like, "Look how great we are. Look how many, things we've done and all these awards we've won," and so on and so forth. And through that lens of we're the guide and the client is the hero,
mhm,
it was obvious how wrong we were in approaching this conversation, these types of conversations, and ultimately creating friction because we were battling with the true hero, saying that
mhm.
we're the hero when they're really the hero.
Gotcha. And after that, you changed all the photos.
Yeah, we changed the photos and we made it much more story driven as a result.
Gotcha.
We realized
Beautiful.
that it was about them and not about us.
Mhm,
So now once you've created a connection story and you've told a customer success story, you mentioned a third area is about creating a story about being different, like how,
mhm,
a differentiation story. Can you talk about a little bit about what that is and how it sort of fits within the sales context?
mhm, yeah. Yeah, at one point in the sales cycle, your buyer will inevitably ask themselves, hey, why you, right? Why should I work with you? And maybe they don't make it explicit, but it's in the top of their minds like, hey, we have 10 other providers. Why you? And so a tendency often of the people is just to throw in a bunch of data points, say, we're the greatest, we operate in 30 different markets. And so to
Yeah.
just put all that stuff out there. And we all know, like, everyone is a number one in something, right? Everyone is a bestseller, everyone is a award winner, everyone is so it's very easy for each one of your competitor to say exactly the same thing, that they are really
Yes.
good at some stuff. And so what you want to do in those moments is you want to share a story that really shows how you're different. A story
Mm.
that backs it up. So think of the claim that you want to make. What is the claim that you want to make to the customer? Is it maybe, hey, we're here for you 24/7? Maybe it's that we triple your revenue. Like each one of those claims that you want to make, is there a story that backs that up? And so then instead of just making that claim, you then
I
share a
love this.
story that really brings that claim to life.
Hey, it's Corey. I wanted to take a quick break from the show to say that if you're an agency owner looking for a strategic and reliable white label partner, you should check out E2M. They offer website design, WordPress development, e-commerce solutions, SEO, PPC, and content writing. And they are trusted by over 300 agencies. You can check out E2M's transparent and flexible pricing model at e2msolutions.com/the deep specialization podcast. For limited time, E2M is offering a special 20% discount for the deep specialization podcast listeners on your first month. Go check them out. Now back to the show. I love that. I love that. So it's not good enough just to have claims and do the trust me sale. It's let me tell you a story about a real world situation where
Mhm.
someone just like you achieved this outcome that supports our claim
That's it.
effectively.
Mhm.
What else about it should be true for it to be impactful?
One thing that you want to make sure that it's maybe not a too generic claim either. Let's say, hey,
Mm.
wow, we put the customer first. Well, we've all heard that a million times. And so maybe there's something a little bit more unique about your claim that not everyone else is saying.
So, in the world of agencies, the world that I operate in and that a lot of the listeners live in is, you have these buyers, these people who are coming to their sales process who are very skeptical. Maybe they've been burned by someone else. Maybe they have they had a bad experience with another agency, so they come in like the energy is like their arms are crossed. They're hesitant to be there. They don't really want to be on this sales call with this agency. How could you use stories or storytelling to sort of address that objection about like we've been burned by other agencies? Any
Mhm.
ideas on how to approach that for the
Yeah.
agency owner?
Yeah. First, and I would probably say instead of launching into a story straight away, just try to
Mm,
understand what happened, right? Because
yeah,
oftentimes we hear an objection, we're like, "Oh, okay, you guys are too expensive." And then you're like, okay, let me jump into story now. That's too early. Like, hey, what's actually the objection? Like, what is behind that? Then you can ask, hey, you mentioned that it's a little bit out of your budget. What do you have in mind, right? Or where
mm,
does it come from? And so you try to go a few layers deeper. What's the
yeah,
real problem here? And only
mm,
once you have then identified the real problem behind the objection, then you can launch into the story. And then ideally, you want to
yeah,
pick a story that addresses that objection. So you can say, another customer like that I worked with a year back, she was also concerned about price. She said, hey,
mm,
if I do this, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, then yeah, I'm pretty much broke. And then you go into your story, right? And then you tell the full story around this, how this was an initial concern, but at the end, how you just exceeded so much the expectation that it never came up. That instead, actually,
yeah.
that customer is still with you, and today more than happier than ever.
Yeah, I love that. So just to feed that back to you, just get really clear on the true objection. So they may feed you an objection, but it's through active listening, good questions to really get to the core of it. And then once you have that, validate it, and then go. That's the time to go into a story.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. From a sales perspective, I'm a big fan of understanding what the common objections are, like what we're talking about, and then having a story that you could pair with each one of those,
hmm
kind of like the claims that you
hmm
mentioned, like having a paired
hmm
client story with each objection. Really
Beautiful.
powerful.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
this. This is very effective.
How does the fact that we are selling through virtual environments and Zoom and all these different sort of platforms, how does that medium change your approach to storytelling, if at all? How should you adapt your storytelling approach if you are selling through Zoom?
Yeah. I would say it doesn't make a massive difference.
Mm,
The only significant difference that I see, sure, it's a little bit harder to read the energy in the room. And so what you can choose is to pause your story more often.
okay.
And I know people think, okay, I just have to tell this 2 minute story and then I'm good. Like, it doesn't have to be that way, especially in a customer conversation. Make it a conversation. Like, this
Mm,
is not a TED talk. This is not where you speak for like 15 minutes and share your beautiful thoughts on the world. It is, for example, when you have a customer story, you can ask them first for permission. Then you launch into your story after you share the problem that the customer faced. You can then ask, hey, but should I share how that other customer overcame that problem? You ask
mm,
again for permission, then you go into the solution. So you can break up the story a few times and
okay.
actually check in with the other person whether they're interested. And when
Mm,
they're like, yeah, please tell me, then you can go on. But that's a little bit more, it helps you more to get some feedback whether they actually want to hear the story or not.
yeah. I think that's so important. I think about I do workshops, and one of the things I've learned along the way in a workshop environment is just asking for the audience to participate. Like, jump in the chat and tell me what you think. And I think that's definitely true for a Zoom environment on one-on-one even. Just make it
Mhm,
more of a conversation back and forth, a
mhm,
game of tennis versus, I'm on the podium and I'm going to talk for for an hour
mhm.
at you.
That's it. Yeah. I guess online it can sometimes be a little bit also mental talk because I notice sometimes when I
Mm,
give a workshop and I tell stories, I'm like, fuck, right? I'm talking here for so much. Are people even listening? Because you sometimes you don't know, right? You're looking in the camera, and so you're not getting that feedback. So it's more than of the internal struggle that you have to deal with, of still, let's say, keeping up the confidence there, being truthful to
yes.
your story. And so I think it's much more of an inner game that is harder online than in person.
How do you, how do you prepare for that, or how do you succumb or overcome, I should say, that potential doubt, that internal doubt?
Yeah. To be honest, I still struggle with that quite a bit. That being said, a few things have helped me to have less of that inner critic. Anytime that I share a story, I just tell myself a few things I'm grateful for. I just tell myself, hey, Philip, so awesome that you tried out this new story. Like you're taking a risk,
Mm.
you're growing, you're trying to connect. And so I just do so much grateful self talk after sharing the story that this will hopefully shift in the long run just how comfortable I am telling stories in any opportunity.
That also kind of segues into another area of expertise. You wrote another book about speaking in public,
Mhm.
right? And I think it's like the second most feared thing for humans across the world is getting up in front of a crowd and speaking. And I think you have some expertise that the audience can really benefit from as it relates to public speaking. Many of us, and myself included, when I work with agency founders, one of the areas where they could build expertise is by getting on stage and by talking in front of people. And a lot of us don't have either a lot of experience or just feel comfortable doing that. What are some ways that someone who maybe wants to speak more on stages could approach this idea of public speaking, whether or not includes storytelling, but just the actual art and science of public speaking? What general advice would you give someone who's just starting off down the road?
Yeah. Yeah, that has changed a little bit over the years, but I feel that right
Mm,
now it's actually something that I feel very strongly that this is the most powerful way on how to get good at public speaking. Before that, I thought like, "Ah, okay, I'll do some mindset hacks, blah, blah, blah." But today I realized the most effective way to become a better speaker is just through improvisation. And sure, it can be joining an improv group. That's awesome. Always works. But it's improvising at home. So you get a random topic. Let's say random debate topics. Should school uniforms be legal? Boom, you set the timer, 3 minutes. Bam, you just start. You go for this. Or you get a random topic. You get five random objects. Let's say an apple, a cardboard, a book, a whatever do we have, glass. And then you just start improvising a story or a speech on those objects for like 2, 3 minutes. And so improv is the most powerful tool to become a better speaker. Why does it matter so much? Because the best speakers, they're not the ones that prepare the most, but the best speakers are the ones that bounce back the quickest from any mistakes. And so mistakes will inevitably happen, right? On stage, like this happens when you speak all the time.
yeah.
But how do you respond in that moment? Is it that you freeze and you're like, "Huh, fuck, fuck, fuck," or do you like, "Hey, I've been in that so many times. Like I know this stuff.
Mm,
Anything could happen right now, and I'd be fine with that." And
mm,
that comfort, that only comes through improvising more. And so
yeah.
if I had to pick anything that I would recommend anyone and that I still do today to just become a better speaker is to improvise more.
So let me feed that back to you. By the way, you're reminding me. I did a improv class, and it was it was it was when I was a full-time salesperson, and I was trying to get out of my shell a little bit,
Mhm.
right? Because in improv, you're on stage and they say, "You're in a grocery store, go." You just have to talk, right? It's that same
Mhm.
thing where you have these 5 different things, and I remember being really intimidated the whole time because I was in front of strangers who I didn't know,
Mhm.
but it was also very liberating knowing that I could just stream of consciousness go and talk, and in that little skit, whatever comes out of my mouth, it's yes, right? It's
Mhm.
okay, like,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and they're just gonna go with it, right? So there's
Mhm.
no it was, oddly fun and intimidating at the same time, but I think the benefit was that I was able to be more free in the moment as we are, right now. So I love this idea of just, free forming on talking and being able to just talk it about some innate object for a couple minutes, being able to do that, have comfort around that. I love that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any other advice? Yeah.
I guess the one that can be helpful as well, and that one is a little bit more extreme, is an exercise that I discovered in New York while I was doing my MBA there. And so I still remember on this one day, I'd read this article about this new concept. And I thought, back then I was terrified of public speaking. And I thought, you know what? Okay, let me give it a try. So I grabbed my jacket, I went outside, and I saw a man approaching me. And I'm like, hi, sir. Excuse me, can I give you a hug? And the man was like, yeah, sure, bring it in. And he gives me this awkward man hug. And then I tried the same with women. She didn't want to hug me. But as I stood there, I started an exercise called
Mm.
constructive embarrassment. And so,
Okay.
constructive embarrassment is about putting yourself on purpose in embarrassing situations. And so
Mm.
that can be anything. That can be asking a stranger for a hug. That can be high fiving a stranger, going to a grocery store and singing there for the crowd in the grocery store. The options are really infinite. But constructive embarrassment is just so powerful because when you do that stuff, you stop caring so much what other people think. Because
Mm.
what is the fear of public speaking? We care so much because we care how other people perceive us, whether they
Yes.
will judge us, whether they will think we're intelligent, whether they think we're qualified. We're so worried how other people perceive us. And so, by being so worried about that, it's impossible to be in the moment, to have fun, to be a great speaker. And so, constructive embarrassment is the most powerful tool to get over that fear of rejection, over that fear of judgment. And so that is really, really powerful. Not everyone is ready to do that because, yes, it's very awkward, but I've seen gigantic transformations for the people that have done that.
So you have a YouTube channel that I love binging on because you actually share some of your experiences of this constructive embarrassment, and you share that journey that you're doing. You're leading by going first, and so if anyone here is interested in seeing Philip being, constructively embarrassing himself and get the courage as a result of watching that, it's definitely given me courage. I've not yet done the hugging challenge, but I think that that is something that, would only improve my life. I love the idea of constructive embarrassment. What's been besides hugging, have you tried other things, or what other things have you tried?
Yeah, I can give you my top three most awkward ones if you want to.
Please, let's go.
One, definitely singing in a full New York subway random reggaeton song. That was very awkward just because subway is a closed space where you cannot escape from. Like you have to wait until next stop. So that was super, super awkward. Another one, which I don't know why I struggle so much with that, but it's walking into a restaurant and then pretending to be a waiter. So you walk up to a table and you're like, oh, hello, welcome to blah, blah, blah. Can I take your order? You then pretend to take the order and then you walk outside again. I don't know why I find it so hard, but it was so difficult. And then the third one, yeah, that one was difficult for me. I know for maybe the American crowd even more, but I went here to a nudist beach. I went to a nudist beach and I interviewed a bunch of people, also in nude. And so that,
How did
well,
that go?
it went well. It went better than expected, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely showed me as well that hey, I still have quite some shame left in there.
Now this is a video that you have on your YouTube channel, as I recall.
No,
True?
I'm actually debating whether I should take it down.
Honestly, I think it's, for me, I'll speak personally, but yeah, it gives me courage to do things that are potentially embarrassing or that I would perceive to be embarrassing. So I hope you don't take it down. All of this has been wonderful. I love all the tactical advice you've been giving Philip. That's really what people come to this show for. So I'll ask you two last questions as we wrap up here. What would be your parting advice, particularly for, let's say, an agency founder who is struggling with leveraging storytelling in their sales process? What is the one bit of feedback or advice that you would give them to get started down this road?
Mhm. Tell micro stories. Like, don't think
Mm.
about the full story, but just pick the next situation, next meeting, and just come with an intention. And you say, hey, today I'm going to share this tiny story when someone asks me, how are you? Or today I'm going to share just this one snippet of a successful client as a customer success story. And just this one snippet, that's it. So set yourself the intention to tell a micro story that takes like
I love
10 to
that.
20 seconds and then slowly build your way up.
I love it. That's great actionable advice. And then one last question for you, Philipp. You are the author of 2 books, about to have your 3rd. You have a great YouTube channel that, again, I recommend people go find and subscribe. Great content. What's your motivation?
Mhm. That's a big question.
Mhm.
I guess for public speaking and storytelling, the motivation came from lack. And it's mostly that, yeah, I was never a good speaker. I was never a storyteller at all.
Mm,
And so I just felt that years and years, this was just holding me back crazy. Sure, I had decent jobs, but I felt like every single time I had to present, I just started to freak out. And I saw the toll that that had on my life, on my happiness. Like not being able to communicate well your ideas and getting terrified of public speaking. It just puts so much pressure. Like it becomes this everything in life. And that's a terrible feeling to have. And I feel right now that, hey, if I can help anyone not have that same feeling and actually just feel
mm.
free to communicate, free to share their ideas, free to go for whatever they want to, I'm very happy for everything that I can do to be part of that.
That's amazing. It is real. What you were feeling, obviously, you're not alone in that. There's many of us that struggle in this area, and I love that you have dedicated your career, writing books, have courses, YouTube channels, everything to helping people through that. So I think that's really beautiful. Where can people reach out to you to learn more about you? Maybe, find you online. Where should people connect with you?
Mhm. Yeah, I would say the two places that I hang out the most is probably LinkedIn and YouTube. I have an Instagram, but it's mostly for my dancing videos. But no, mostly I would say YouTube and LinkedIn. Otherwise, also my website, it's powerofstorytelling.com. So power dash of
Mm.
dash storytelling.com. And yeah, just drop me a note and let me know if you have any questions when it comes to storytelling or public speaking.
Beautiful. So I will make sure those links are in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining, Philip.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Corey.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deep Specialization Podcast. If you haven't checked out my best-selling book, Anyone, Not Everyone, you can download the audiobook for free right now by going to anyoneNotEveryone.com. That's anyoneNotEveryone.com. And finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, E2M. We'll see you in the next episode.